Good evening, everyone. So, welcome to our meetup for March 2021. So, I think March is I would say, Women's Month. So, this is really a woman's power. Really, we have Maria and Nicole as our guests for MOT Manila, Philippines. So, before we start, I'd like to present. Okay, so let me just check. Okay, so I'm your host, Anthony. So just for the interest of time, I'll go to the next slide. Okay, so for those who don't know or for those who are new, so this is MOT Philippines. And this is the biggest and the most supportive global software testing community. We are 77 cities worldwide. Okay, and this is our mission. So coming together, to advance everyone's knowledge in a very positive way as well. And this is MOT actually started in Cambridge. Okay, and as we all know, well, for sure, Mary knows this that Cambridge is considered as a Silicon Fen. Okay, it's just like the Silicon Valley as well. So there are a lot of technology companies are in Cambridge. Okay, so these are some of the cities that we are present. Okay, and we only started last April 25, 2019 here in Manila. So we launched it with Asian Institute of Management or AIM. So we're pretty much very young community in Manila. And this is also a complementary of other testing software community. So please do support other communities, Software Testing Philippines, QA is a new QE community as well. So those are pretty much with the same mission and vision in terms of helping the software test community. Okay, and this is our also, we are also in social media, in Facebook. We are currently live as well. And well, I don't have much further introduction, but Mary and Nicole are actually not in Manila. Okay, so Nicole is in Netherlands. Sorry, Nicole, I didn't get the specific area.
That's okay.
And Mary is in UK, London right now. Okay, so there are actually both. I would say Filipinos, so supporting our community here in Manila. So thank you so much. So for sure they have introduction as well on their slides. I would assume that. So without further ado, so let's call our speaker. But before that, sorry. Please save the date for April 22nd. This will be our next meetup. So we'll talk about different kinds of tests in Python. So we'll have another partner community. AWS community will be providing speaker for us. So I think that's it. So let's welcome our speaker. I'm not sure who's going to go first. So
I'll go first, yeah.
okay.
And just a small request. So, if everyone can just mute themselves para at least a recording, it's all good. And then I'll just quickly share my screen.
So by the way, Mary, we have some viewers from Australia. So I think there
Yeah,
are some
I'll speak
requests
in English.
earlier that we need to speak English.
Yeah,
Okay. Okay.
definitely. Okay.
Thank you.
I'll just share my whole screen. So, um, okay, so hi everyone, and welcome to. Oh, that's a bit loud. Okay, so welcome to today's meetup. My name is Marie Drake, and I'm from the Philippines. Originally, like Anthony said, and I wish I can present this meetup in Filipino, but I'll do it in English so other non-Filipino speakers can also understand. So I'm currently a quality engineering manager at Zoopla, and I'm also a tech blogger at mariedrake.com. You can find me on Twitter at mcruisedrake. So if you have any questions specifically after this meetup, feel free to message me directly. So today I'll give you an overview first as to why you should care for your application's performance. Then I'll talk about front end performance testing specifically and how you can use Lighthouse to test the performance of your website. And then after that, I'll do a quick live demo. So I hope that goes well later, on how you can use or on how you can integrate Lighthouse to your Cypress tests. But before I do that, I'll hand it over quickly to Nicole so she can also do her introduction and just give an overview as to what she'll be talking about today.
Hi, I just wanted to ask Anthony, are we recording na ba? I'm not sure if we should,
Yeah, I
if I
think
should
it's
hit the
like
record button or.
Yeah, I think Sydney is
Yeah,
recording.
I'm still working on it.
Okay, all
Just a
right.
minute.
Should I continue? Okay, here
Yeah,
we
we're still
go.
recording, Sydney, so you should be able to hear us.
Yes. All right, great. I am Nicole Mendoza Vanderhoeven. I am Filipino, Australian, and Dutch in that order. I currently live in Maastricht in the Netherlands. I've been a performance tester for about 10 years now. I currently work as a developer advocate at K6. And I'm also Filipino. Oh, I think I already mentioned that. But you can also send me messages on Twitter if you have any questions, or just put it in chat. I'm sure we are both leaving some time after our presentation so we can answer more specific questions.
okay. So, one of the important question for today is why you should care for your application's performance. And I'd like to set up a simple scenario for everyone. So because of the current lockdown at the moment, most, if not every, retail shop out there is closed. So if you have to, to buy something, you'll have to resort to doing online shopping instead. So now, imagine that you're browsing a specific website that you want. You want to buy new shoes, and we're all working from home, so we probably need extra shoes. But anyway, so you found the item that you want, and you click the image thumbnail, but then suddenly the page is not responding as quickly as you want, and just after seconds of waiting, you decide that it's much better to open another tab and go to a different competitor website. So I've definitely experienced this case where a random page was just taking too long to load, and because I'm quite impatient myself, I just close it down and not bother to wait. So why does this frustration occurs? So we now live in a digital era, and we use technology on a day-to-day basis, and we have been accustomed to instant gratification. We want the information to be presented to us as quickly as possible. It's also a known fact that slow websites frustrates us. A slow website not only frustrates users, but businesses can actually lose a considerable amounts of money if their websites cannot keep up with their customers' expectations. Nowadays as well, it's so easy to post bad reviews about your website on different social media platforms, and this can lead to a poor company branding and poor user experience. So now that you know the why, I'll talk about what performance testing is next. So performance testing is typically divided into two areas. We have the front end or client side, and then the back end or the server side. So Nicole will talk about back end performance testing in more detail, but basically the aim is to ensure that when multiple requests are sent from different users simultaneously, we need to be able to test that our servers can handle the load accordingly. Now, when we speak about front-end performance testing, the aim is to test how fast a single user can see the web responses instantly. And the way different browsers process data from the servers, it actually has an impact on the performance itself. So, for example, if we look at JavaScript, so JavaScript makes a website interactive and fully functional, but it can also contribute as to why a website is very slow, especially if it's not optimized. There's actually a lot of tools nowadays to choose from to help you test the performance of your website. But today I'll be talking about one of the most popular tools out there for testing the performance of your web pages, which is Google Lighthouse. Now, if you're not aware of Google Lighthouse, so Google Lighthouse is an open source tool which lets you audit the performance of your website. But apart from performance, it can also audit other areas such as accessibility, SEO, or even best practices. Here's just a quick example on how easy it is to get an audit from Lighthouse directly from Chrome. So with this audit, you don't need a specific technical skill. You just have to load up a website that you want to audit and then right click to open up developer tools. And then you should then see a Lighthouse tab as this is already built in. Now, when you run an audit, it should start auditing the page and it should give you a score against some specific key metrics that Lighthouse uses. Now, the latest version of Lighthouse is actually version 6.0. And in this latest version, there are 6 important key metrics to understand. So the first one is first contentful paint or FCP. Now, FCP measures the time it takes for the browser to render the smallest piece of DOM content. And this doesn't necessarily mean that our users can see anything yet on our screen. We also have large contentful paint or LCP. Now, LCP, it actually measures the time it takes for the browser to render the largest piece of DOM content. So it's just the opposite of the first contentful paint. We also have speed index on the other hand. So this measures how long it takes for the content to visually load while the page is still loading. There's also time to interactive. So time to interactive actually measures how long it takes for our page to become interactive so that our users can start using it. And then we have total blocking time. So total blocking time, it actually measures the time it takes for as to when our page is blocked after responding to particular user events such as button clicks. And Lighthouse actually consider it as a blocking task if it executes for more than 50 milliseconds. And then finally, we have cumulative layout shift or CLS. Now, CLS, it actually measures how often the page layout shifts while the page is loading. So in general, with all these different performance metrics, the lower the scores, the better it is for your performance. Now, there are multiple ways to run Lighthouse, but the most easy and the most straightforward is to run it as part of Chrome Developer Tools since it's already built in as you saw on one of the previous slides. Lighthouse also has a browser extension which is available on both Chrome and Firefox. If you don't want to install anything, then you can also visit web.dev/measure and you can just provide a URL of your choice as it also uses Lighthouse. Now, if you want to use Lighthouse on a much more advanced way, then you can also use Lighthouse CLI, which you can use from the command line, or you can also use it as a Node.js application. So if you want to integrate it as part of your CI/CD pipeline, then you can give this a try. And then finally, there's also a Cypress plugin based on Lighthouse CLI, which you can easily use within your Cypress test. So if you're already using Cypress, then this could be an option for you. So Cypress is currently one of the most popular JavaScript testing frameworks out there. And one of the things that I really like about it is its ability to cover other types of testing easily. So when I found out that there was a plugin to integrate Google Lighthouse with Cypress, I decided to give it a try. This custom plugin, this was created by Marvin Frashe, and it basically leverages your existing Cypress tests, and it will also introduce additional commands to check the performance of any pages that you want to audit. Now, this doesn't automatically mean that you should use Cypress for all your performance testing needs. There are other tools out there that are much equipped, to do that, especially if you want to do load testing. But what the plugin offers is an easy way to track your Google Lighthouse scores by extending the Cypress default functionality. So now, I'm gonna attempt to do a live demo on how easy it is to integrate Lighthouse into your Cypress tests. And for those of you who want to follow along, I have prepared an example GitHub repo here that you can clone afterwards. So I'm just gonna switch my screen, and hopefully you can still see it. Oh, there's a few steps that we need to do in order to integrate the Cypress audit plugin. The first step, and if you're already familiar with npm or with any JavaScript project, so the first step that you have to do is you have to install the package. So I've done that already here. So I've installed Cypress audit, and I've just installed the version 0.3.0. And then the next step that we need to do is we need to prepare the server configuration. So just to give a quick overview, so by default, if you use Google Lighthouse from the command line, it actually opens up a new web browser when it does the audit. And if you're also familiar, with Cypress, when we run the test, it also opens up a visual test runner, which loads the Chrome browser as well. So what we want to achieve, and why we need to add this code here, is we want to run Lighthouse inside the same browser as Cypress, rather than opening a new one. So we need to require some additional functions from Cypress audit, and then add this additional code here. So I'll explain this in a much more detail, but not really on a technical level. So the first thing that I've done is I have required the Cypress audit library, and then on this library I need these two functions called Lighthouse and prepare audit. Cypress actually reacts to various events. So one of the event that Cypress actually listens to is called before browser launch. So every time our browser launches, Cypress will listen to that event. And on this particular example, what I've done here is I'm actually calling the prepare audit, which is the function from Cypress audit, and we're just passing in the launch options object. This might sound confusing, but basically what I'm doing here is I'm passing the command line arguments that we're using to Cypress audit. And then the next thing that we need to do is we need to create a simple task. A task in Cypress allows us to execute something on the Node.js backend process. And because Google Lighthouse CLI is a Node.js backend process, we need to wrap it as a task so that we can use this function in our Cypress tests. Now, the third and the final step that we need to do is we just need to simply import this command so that we can make Cypress aware that we have these new commands that we need to use. Oh, I've already overridden the base URL property here. So for anyone of you that's not familiar, this property will be our base URL on all of our Cypress tests. So we don't need to keep writing the same URL again and again. So for this specific example, it's just using the test website that Nicole has created for us. Okay. So now I'm going to run the test itself. And if you're already familiar as well with Cypress, you know that it's just using the Mocha syntax under the hood. So the describe block is just a way to describe what our test is. Before each it actually executes before each of our single tests. And then the it statement here just basically refers to the test that we want to write. So the first thing that I want to show you is now that we have exported the command, imported the commands that we need from Cypress Audit, we should have access to this different command. So in order to do a simple basic performance audit, you just need to call Lighthouse. And then once I save this, it should redirect us to the Cypress test runner. So you should see that additional logs are being printed here. You also notice that a new tab was open, and by default, it was loading it on the mobile viewport. And then because we didn't pass anything on the side.lighthouse command, it actually run our test on the default threshold, which is 100. So you can see here that our test is failing because it didn't meet the default threshold of 100. So you can see here that the performance, it was actually 96, but it's not 100. Accessibility is 93. And what I'll show next is I want to show you how to override these different properties, because let's be honest, no website out there has a hundred performance score. So this is not very ideal for for most cases. It might be that you're still trying to integrate Lighthouse into your projects, and you just want to monitor the scores that you have on a day-to-day basis, and you won't get 100 at the beginning. So what I'll show you is on our second test. So I'm still gonna call Lighthouse. But then this time, rather than not passing anything, we can actually pass some custom object. So in this case, Lighthouse accepts a configuration that lets us override the default thresholds for some of the different metrics. So say, for example, we want accessibility to have a threshold of, let's say, 70, and then we want performance to currently be set at, I'll say, 70 again. And then for our SEO, let's set it to 60 for now. And then once I save this, let me just actually add the only keyword here so it doesn't run our first test. Let's still run it. Okay, let me just save this again. Okay, so now that we have override the different thresholds, you can see that everything is now passing. So this is very dependent on what your performance testing requirements is, but it's good to know that you can easily override the different values. And then the final thing that I want to demo before I hand it over to Nicole is if you notice, already, it's actually running our test on the default mobile viewport. So what if we also want to run it on the desktop view? To do that, we can also modify the emulation properties. So we need to pass another custom object for it. And I'll share some useful links later, because in order for you to know which property to override, you need to understand the different emulation properties that Google Lighthouse CLI uses. So after this, I'm gonna go back to my slide and share some useful links for you to know, because you need to be able to understand like what values to set, which properties to override, all those sort of things. So the first property that you need to override if you want to set it so that it will run on the desktop view is the form factor. And you just have to set this to have the value of desktop. And then the next property that you need to set is the screen emulation. Now, you can pass in, specific height and width, for this, but I'm just going to use the default and then just set the disabled property to true. Now, if I save this test, you'll see that when it opened a new tab, rather than running it on the mobile viewport, it's now running it on the desktop view. And you'll see that we have a failure here because the performance slightly dipped, which is now 62 and instead of the 70 threshold. The other thing that you might notice as well, so if you're going to compare the Lighthouse performance scores that you get from like from the results here, and then if you compare it, let's say, to what the Chrome developer tools built-in Lighthouse tool is giving you, you might notice that you'll get different scores, and that's okay because what actually Google Lighthouse CLI does is it uses different configuration settings for the like for the CPU throttling, for like the different like slowness property. So it's actually much more like slower if you use the Google Lighthouse CLI. And it's not an issue with the Cypress audit plugin directly. It's just how the Google Lighthouse CLI runs your test by default. So if you notice that there's some discrepancy as opposed to what the browser audit is telling you, it's because of like the different configuration settings. So let me go back to my slide. So here are some useful links that hopefully you might find useful. So I actually wrote a much more detailed blog post about it, which you can find on my blog. So it's just added here. If you want to know more about the actual Cypress audit plugin instead, then have a look at their GitHub page. And similarly, so because the Cypress audit plugin actually uses the Lighthouse CLI under the hood, it's best to be familiarized with the different commands that Lighthouse CLI is using. So I've added those two links as well. And this one just basically talks about the way to actually emulate like on the different settings. So this is how I found how you can emulate the desktop view instead of the mobile viewport. So hopefully that was helpful. And if it's too technical, have a look at my blog post here. And I'll pass it over now to Nicole. So she'll talk about the backend performance testing.
So Marie just showed us how to test the front end of a site. And as she mentioned, that's everything that an end user would see. But why isn't it enough to test just that? This picture is the experience of many people who test the front end of an application. Everything's meant to be publicly consumable, so everything's pretty and formatted nicely and accessible, or at least it should be. And this is what many backends look like in comparison. It's more like a kraken underneath. Because this is the part that isn't visible to customers, it can often be unwieldy and hard to understand. And that means it's also harder to test. The kraken of an application could be a Frankenstein monster of different technologies, languages, and protocols cobbled together, and that's pretty normal these days. The back end is by its very nature not very visual. So a big part of back end testing is about making that visual so that you can see what's going on. And that's why tools are so important. So if back end testing is like the kraken hiding underneath the surface, and if it's more difficult to test, then why should we bother testing it? Here are some benefits that back end testing gives beyond front end testing. First, it reveals bottlenecks at the component level. Front-end testing tweaks the end result, the nice UI that will ultimately be interacted with. But which application components exactly are slow and why? Front-end testing won't be able to answer that. Maybe the elements on the page that are slow are being hosted on a server that is underpowered or overutilized. You're not going to be able to pinpoint that just by looking at requests in a browser. That stuff is hidden from customers on purpose because, after all, we definitely don't want them to see all that mess. Second is shift left and modularity. Since applications begin as code, without the UI built, front-end testing can't be done, but back-end testing can. So that means that with back-end testing, you can test earlier in the software development cycle. And in fact, ideally, your developers should already be writing unit tests for performance. The earlier that performance defects are spotted, the easier and more cost-effective it is to fix them. Backend testing also lets you be more modular and granular, and that you can target just one part of the application that's already built. So you don't need the entire environment or the entire application to be built before you can do backend testing. So that means that if an integration hasn't been built yet, you can still test the component that is built. You can mock up responses that it would expect to receive. And so backend testing lets you do system testing for performance as features are being created. Thirdly, it replicates behavior under load. Front end excels at optimizing a single user's experience of an application. You can use front-end tools to load test the back end as well, but those tools are typically really resource intensive by their very nature. So it can be significantly more expensive to do that, and you might require more load generators than you have or want to pay for. So we spend as testers a lot of time making sure that the test environments that we're using for our tests are as close to the real thing as possible. We want the same application logic, the same interface, the same integrations, but we forget that load is part of that. Part of a production-like environment is the production load. Back-end testing lets you see how the user's experience degrades when there are many others that are doing the same or different things at the same time. It's like the ultimate dress rehearsal. And back-end testing also lets us improve failure handling, because it's hard to induce very significant failures in front-end testing that affect all or most users, because if we can induce it from there, from the interface, then so can our users. But in back-end testing, we have access to things that are under the hood, so we can run more interesting and isolated experiments on our application. In fact, we can purposely create catastrophic scenarios to see how quickly or gracefully the application recovers, or to see if it recovers at all. And this includes issues that arise from structural or architectural decisions, like should we consider using a Kubernetes cluster for a particularly vital part of the application, or should we use a CDN to distribute our resources? But backend testing lets us test assumptions about how the application is built and decide whether or not we want to change it. So if backend testing is so valuable, why don't more teams do it? I think it comes down to one of four things. One, we don't have the time. Two, we don't have an environment, with the assumption that performance testing might burn down the house, like in this photo. Three, we don't have the expertise. And four, we don't have the money. So in my demo, I'm going to challenge these assumptions. But first, let me talk about a common misconception that I think is at the root of these assumptions. And that is that when people say performance testing, they really mean load testing. But those two, performance and load, are not the same thing. Load testing is a subset of performance testing. Marie already talked about how front-end performance testing is different and an important part of a performance testing strategy. But even within back-end performance testing, there are more test types than just load testing. So here's the demo, live demo. Okay, I am going to sign in to my K6 account. K6 is an open source load testing tool that also has this SaaS platform that is not open source, but you can also use that if you'd like. I'm just going to use the interface to get started with a load test because I think that's just the easiest way to start. But K6 scripts are written in JavaScript, so you can keep those JavaScript K6 scripts along with the JavaScript files that you're using for your Cypress tests, which is why Marie and I thought it would be a good thing to tie them together. So I already created a new project, but actually let me delete this one. So just so we can start fresh. So I want to show you what it looks like when you're starting to test. So we have this test builder, which is just a nice, easy interface to start off with. And even though this is part of the SaaS platform, here's a tip. You can sign up for this completely for free, use the test builder, and just take the script and run it yourself if that's what you'd like. So the first thing that I'll do is configure the load. Let's say that I just want 10 users. 5 minutes is fine. And I'll just use the defaults here. And for the name of the request, I'm just going to say home. And as Marie said, we are both testing this cool site that I deployed, which is just actually a Google microservices demo. So what this is doing is it's creating a transaction that just does a get for this site. So let's go to that so you see what it looks like. This is a site that I did not create. It's hosted on GCP, Google Cloud Platform. So I'm going to add a sleep here because you want it to be as realistic as possible. A real user doesn't fire off request after request with no spaces in between. So you want to try and add some think time. And this is what I was saying as well, that you can toggle it to the script to actually see what that looks like in JavaScript. And if you want to, you can just copy this out and run it locally or wherever you'd like to run your load test from. And then from here, it's just a matter of clicking create and run. And what this is doing is K6 is starting up a virtual machine, an instance in AWS, and that's our cloud and our infrastructure. So this is the part that we do charge for because Amazon charges us as well. But you can access the features before this part completely for free. There's also a free trial of 50 tests, I think. And so while this is happening, so it's actually already running the test, but I also want to show a different way to start the test. So I'm going to go back to the project. Oh, this is, by the way, the test already. But let's go and create a new test. And I'll still go to test builder, but this time I'm going to record a scenario. Now, I already installed a browser extension. This is free again and available in Chrome and Firefox. And if you have a HAR file from somewhere else, you can also use that. But I'm just going to show you how to use this browser extension. So the reason that this is cool is that if we look here, I'm just opening up developer tools. And if I do a hard refresh, that get file, that get request that we're sending is actually only getting the very first one. So there's so much more. Like this is the only part that we were actually trying to retrieve. But what about all of these other resources? Now we could just go to test builder and have and make get requests for each one of these. But I think this is exactly the use case for a recorder. So I'm going to hit record scenario and I will type, oops, the site, the URL here. hit start recording. This is telling you what's going to happen and that we need to stop the recording when we're done. And I'll hit start right away. Okay, so right now all we wanted to do was hit this front page. So I'm going to stop it right away, hit stop. And when that happens, the JavaScript that I showed you earlier is going to be generated, but there are also some options here. So I can see, I can choose whether or not to correlate the request and response data. This isn't needed right now, but there are some instances with other applications where there's some sort of dynamic state. So this engine is going to try to identify that for you and set it up accordingly. And I do want to include the static assets here, so I'm going to deselect this. I do want the sleep included, and there are some third-party domains that K6 spotted that I'm going to leave selected because I don't want them in my script. I don't think Google would appreciate it if I tested their servers along with mine. So I am just going to hit save there. And it takes us to something very similar to what we had in the test builder, except there are way more requests. So this is good. It saved some time because we didn't have to do that manually. And if we go and look into this request, which is the same one that we had before, you can also see that the headers have been automatically filled out. And in fact, I'm going to add a check here because this is something that I see a lot in beginner load tests where the testers don't actually verify the response that they get, and they assume that an HTTP 200 will never be an error page, which is an incorrect assumption. So I think it's always good practice to verify something just to make sure you're getting the right response. So I will go to checks. And we'll actually close this developer tools window, and I'm going to view the page source and just look for something that wouldn't be returned by an error page, basically. So this is fine. I'll just use this free shipping with $75 purchase. By the way, this does not work. Don't actually buy anything from there. And then I'll go to text here, click add the check. Then I'll say the body should contain this text. So I just pasted that in there. This time though, I am going to change the load zones. So I'll say Frankfurt, that's the closest one to me, and we'll say Singapore, closest to the Philippines, and we'll choose a few more just to be sure. This is Sydney, Australia. Hello, Australians. Okay, so now we have a few load zones selected, and I'm just going to run that test. It'll go through the same thing, the same process that we saw before, but this time it's starting, I think I selected 5 different availability zones, so it's starting 5 different load generators. And the cool thing with using the interface for it is all of those results are automatically collated. It also doesn't take too long to start, considering how long it normally takes to start machines in general. So this is already 75%. Now, what I'm showing here is that this is not a load test, right? This is 10 users, but there is still a point to running these smaller tests. And one of the reasons that I wanted to show this is to say that not everything has to be a load test. Some applications will never need to be tested for, tens of thousands of users. I think there's a lot of value to tying in some of these smaller tests to CI/CD pipelines. Okay. Just in the interest of time, I'm going to switch to something else that I saw. So there are those two. So this is the test that I ran with the test builder, and it's really cool that there's a performance insight that's been detected. So there's a throughput limit, and it kind of, if you just want to know at a glance what happened to your test, this usually provides some insights. So that's really good. And you can also add your own metrics here, such as, for instance, maybe you want to look at the memory or CPU utilization. So that's just a kind of a way to create custom dashboards. Okay, so let me quickly go back to the presentation. Just to speed through these, we've pretty much busted these myths. For the not having enough time, I created a performance test live in, I think, under 15 minutes or so. So it's clearly not a matter of time. Sure, there are more things that you can do to improve the coverage of your performance tests, but anything is better than nothing. We don't think that way about functional tests. So why don't we think that way about performance tests? You can always start with something. We don't have an environment. You don't need one. Everyone has a production-like environment, and that's production. If that's the only environment that you have, start with running these smaller tests more frequently, like ones that are tied to a CI/CD pipeline, just so that you get historical trends. You can spot performance degradation even with 10 users. We don't have a load testing expert. Well, everyone starts somewhere. You don't have to be an expert. That's why tools are important. You just have to choose tools that empower you to run tests right away, and you can learn and improve your skills along the way. We don't have the budget for that. K6 is open source. You can run it from your local machine, and actually, I don't want to, I won't show the pricing just for time and because I don't want to be too salesy here, but it's like $59 a month for for I think 1,200 tests a year. So I don't think that that's really an issue. In the end, these are all just excuses. There's no magic to performance testing, and you don't need a degree. My degree's in economics, by the way. You don't need years of experience to just start somewhere. And thanks for listening. That's the end of the slides, or I kind of rushed through because I wanted to get in some questions. And if anybody has any questions, please ask them in chat. And I'll leave this slide up so that you can look at our contact details. And we also have our slides at these sites.
Okay, so thank you so much. So probably could proceed immediately with the question. So can we ask someone from Freelancer? I think there are a couple of questions in their chat room. So by the way, there are some people who are connecting as well, as some are not able to access the Zoom. So Freelancer.
Hi, I have some questions for Marie and Nicole.
Okay, go ahead.
Sure.
So for Marie, there are many metrics used to determine the Lighthouse score. What are the top 3 common metrics for the Lighthouse that you would recommend for performance testing?
Yeah, thank you for the question. So I think for me personally, because even though there's actually 6 main metrics, but just from experience, I think one of the most important one is the total time to interactive, because that's the metric that our users actually care about. So because it's when they can actually interact or access your website. Because the other metrics, like for example first contentful paint, where we are just measuring the time it takes for the first piece of DOM content, they don't actually see anything on their screen. Whereas if we look at time to interactive, that's when they can actually start interacting with your website. So if I have to pick like my most important one, I would say that. And then the second most important for me is the cumulative layout shift. So what I mean by that is, if you, for example, visit a page, and this is actually very common on mobile site. So what happened is, if you're browsing on a website and then suddenly you want to click on something, but then suddenly the whole layout shifts. So that actually has a big impact on user experience. So I would keep an eye out on those 2 metrics. However, having said that, the other metrics are still very important. So if you can try to reduce all the metrics scores in the rest, then that's a good start. But if you have to focus on one or two things, it's the total time to interactive for me, and the cumulative layout shift as well. So hopefully that answered your question.
Mhm. Also, I'd just like to ask if you've ever worked with, you've ever used Lighthouse with other types of testing tools before you've tested it with
With
Cypress.
Cypress. We have used just the Lighthouse CLI programmatically, but I haven't used it with any other testing frameworks out there. So it's the first time that I've heard that there is actually a plugin that you can use to integrate with existing frameworks. I might be wrong, but maybe if Nicole knows as well, if it can integrate with Selenium, maybe that can help. But just from personal experience, I've only able to integrate it with Cypress so far.
Okay, thanks. For Nicole, I also have a question. No?
Yeah, sure. I don't know
Ah,
the answer to the Selenium one.
okay.
I've never integrated it with Lighthouse.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so do you think for beginners to load testing, would you recommend the K6 tool for them? Is it like user friendly in case you
Yeah,
want to
and
play with it or something?
yeah, I think that's also why I wanted to start with the test builder and the recorder rather than jumping into the code, because I think that can be a bit of a turn off. I'm not a developer, so I've been able to learn it. I definitely would recommend maybe starting with the test builder, and then just flip that toggle to see what it looks like in the script. Really, once you have a base for the script, then it's just a matter of changing like the URL. You don't have to know the ins and outs of everything.
Okay, thanks so much for that.
Sure. There's also a few questions here that I'd like to answer. I think I already answered Julius's question. So, will K6 still perform the sub requests for JavaScript? Yes, images, etc. Oops, it just moved. Sorry. If you only specify the original HTML page URL. Yeah, so it doesn't do that automatically. And the reason that it doesn't do it automatically is that if you're using something like a CDN, if you're including those static assets, you might be getting charged for a test. So we think that that can be pretty dangerous, and you don't want to be saddled by a surprise bill. So it doesn't do it by default. And that's why you can record and specifically say you want to include those. Hope that makes sense, Alan. Ooh, there's one
Okay.
for Marie.
Okay, yeah. So there are a couple of questions, but just bear in mind that I think Mary and Nicole will still be back to work. I believe. Is that right? so,
Well, this is
It,
so
my job, so.
yeah, I'm
okay,
still on my lunch break, so it's
okay,
okay.
yeah.
I
So
think I saw one from CM. So can we publish Lighthouse performance metrics on Cypress dashboard? So I think this would need additional work. But there is a way to actually get all the different metrics, and then it would need some custom configuration. So it's not built in the Cypress dashboard, unfortunately. But I'm gonna find a sample GitHub repo that one of the testers that I know within the community, because he basically wrote a GitHub repo on how he managed to get the core Lighthouse performance metric score. So I'll add it to the chat. But if you want to configure it so that it will also be integrated to Cypress dashboard, so that's not built in, there needs to be some custom configuration work around it.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Okay, so are there still some questions that you want to answer, Mary and
Yeah,
Nicole?
Julius
Okay.
has a general one for performance testing in general. What are the best practices in planning for both performance and load testing? There's probably only time to give like a quick tip. Mine is start with why, because you need to know why you're testing. And I hope it isn't just to check the box to say, yes, we've done it, now it can go live. Whether what you're planning for is going to change the type of test that you need to run. So it's a good idea to talk to all the stakeholders to make sure everyone knows why. What about you, Marie?
Yeah, I'm nodding because I completely agree. Because I think in terms of performance testing, it's not just our responsibility. It's, it's everyone else's. Like, we can advocate for it, we can be champions for it, but if the rest of the business, they don't see the benefit, then you need to be able to explain it in the language that they understand. So if you talk about, how it can lose customers, how it can have a poor user experience, then, talk about those benefits. Because at the end, if we release new functionality, but then the user performance is slow, like it takes a while to load, then the functionality that you built really doesn't matter at the end.
Okay, I think we are almost well, it's already 9:01 here. Anyway, so I think that probably that's it. And again, thank you so much again for our March 2021 meetup. Thanks for Nicole and Maria. Okay, and I think that's it. And if you have other question, I think their Twitter and slides and sites, for sure they will happy to answer those questions. And in terms of you, if you wanted more information about K6 and as well as about Cypress as well, and you could follow them as well so that you could also get update in terms of what is happening around K6 and Cypress. So thank you everyone, and thanks again.
Thank
Thank you.
you.
Good
Thanks
night.
for
Bye
coming,
bye.
Night
everyone.
and good
Good
afternoon.
night.
Good night.
Thanks.
Bye
Good
bye.
Thanks,
night.
guys.
Bye.
Bye.